Today's top picks from Reuters Breakingviews. Italy wouldn't benefit if the bailout fund did buy sovereign debt. And the return of Hong Kong exchanges expects for its $1.4 billion offer for the LME looks a stretch. With me now to discuss these stories is Reuters Breakingviews' Peter Towle-Larson. Peter, thanks for joining us once again. Let's start with your story, which I struggled to say, but Euro fund bond binge may help creditors, but not Italy. This is the proposal by Italy and France for the bailout funds to buy sovereign debt. But you think it's not a good idea?
Well, it's a sign of the Eurozone's desperation that they're taking old ideas and presenting them as new ones. I mean, this idea has been around for a while, that you get the bailout funds to directly buy the debt on the secondary market of Spain and Italy. And the argument for doing so is that Spain and Italy have done all that they can and need to do to sort of get their own houses in order, and rather than giving them a full bailout, which would stretch in Spain's case, would totally stretch the resources of the bailout fund. In Italy's cases, the bailout fund is nowhere near big enough. You get it to weigh into the secondary market and buy the bonds and try and sort of keep borrowing costs under control that way. But the fact is, the fund isn't big enough. So, we're talking about 500 million, maybe 600 million if you add the EFSF and the ESM, the two bailout funds together. That's not going to be enough to fund Italy's debt, for example.
And does this just take us back to the ECB, effectively? Well,
yeah, and then you ultimately, all roads end up back to the ECB, and you say, well, who could buy in such large quantities that it would be a credible number for the market, and you end up with the ECB. But I mean, just coming back to this idea, the other thing is that the EFSF has it is allowed to buy in the secondary market, but it has some quite significant restrictions. For example, it's forbidden from buying more than 10% of a country's annual GDP. So you can't even put the whole fund to work on Spanish debt or on Italian debt. You'd be limited, and changing that would be very difficult. So we think this is a terrible idea, because all that would happen is that people would take this as an opportunity to dump their remaining Spanish and Italian bonds. You would exhaust the bailout funds, and then you'd be back. You'd buy yourself a few months, and then you'd be back in the same.
And actually, your point there is that if they do all dump the bonds, then actually you're in a worse position than you were in the first place.
Absolutely, yeah, and then you've used up your bailout fund. So the point is, the only way you can do this is if you have a fund that is so large that people basically, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, that people believe that it will be able to suppress yields.
And of course, it's another sticking plaster that doesn't solve the underlying issue in the first place.
Well, that too. I mean, you can argue that, well, this is a liquidity problem, not a solvency problem, and therefore there's an argument for intervention. But the only way you can make it work is if the psychology is that basically you have unlimited resources to buy these bonds, which the bailout funds clearly don't.
Okay, let's move on to our second story. This is the Hong Kong Exchange's offer for the LME, and you're saying it stretches the numbers, and you've got a calculator, and this is all about the bullish projections of Chinese metal demand, and you've got a calculator which we can put up on the plasma screen for us. Lots of variables up here, so tell us what we're
well, the background to this is that the Hong Kong Exchange has paid a big price for the London Metals Exchange and has no real synergies in terms of its operation, because it's not in the metals trading business at the moment. And the whole kind of argument that the Hong Kong Stock Exchange has made is to say, we can help boost the amount of volume that goes through the LME from China, essentially. So we've kind of put some numbers around that to say, well, okay, let's assume that the LME carries on growing on its current trajectory, and assume that the costs and everything are sort of are as they are. Then what would you have to do? What would have to happen in order for the HKX to reach its target return on investment, which it's sort of the bottom end of the range is 10%. They're saying 10 to 15%. So let's be charitable and say that's the bottom end of the range.
Okay.
And then say, okay, you can make tweak some assumptions about what the non-Chinese business does, and then the red sort of bit of the pie there shows you basically how big the Chinese chunk of the business would have to become in order to justify this deal. And I think on our original assumptions we ended up with a number of around 40%, but you can tweak the assumptions. If the other bits of the business grow more slowly, then actually China has to become an even bigger chunk of the pie, and from a standing start. So that's the challenge that faces the HKX.
And you're suggesting that they are rather over optimistic in terms of China.
Well, I mean, it's an interesting question. you can make an argument about whether China is going to buy more metals and or whether more of that its metals demand is going to go through the LME. The question is, can the Hong Kong exchange influence that? So its whole argument has been that it's in a better position to influence that than another owner for the LME. But when you talk to people in China, they say, well, actually that decision is going to get made in Shanghai and Beijing and not in Hong Kong.
Okay, Peter, thanks very much indeed for that. Plenty of time for you to have a look at that calculator and play with all the numbers. That's all for now. My thanks to Peter Tal-Larsen. For more agenda-setting financial insight, watch our US Breaking Views show every day at 12:30 Eastern, 17:30 London. I'm Nigel Stevenson. This is Reuters.